My name is Anna Thompson. I am 20 years old, and I had always believed that Christmas Eve was supposed to be a night of warmth, laughter, and family unity. The smell of roasted turkey mixed with cinnamon candles, the glow of the tree lights reflecting in the windows, the clinking of silverware. These were the images I carried in my head when I imagined what it meant to belong. But last Christmas Eve, in a single moment that split me in two, my parents shattered that illusion and left me standing in front of a crowd of relatives with nothing but shock in my chest. I can still hear the sound of my father Robert's voice, heavy and final, echoing across the dining room. He said the words like he had been rehearsing them, steady and cold. "Anna is no longer part of this family." My mother Linda sat beside him, her chin lifted with the kind of certainty that burned, and she nodded as if sealing the sentence. My younger sister Sophie smirked, leaning back in her chair, like a queen who had just won. Finally, she said under her breath, but loud enough for me and others to hear finally, some peace. In that instant, the laughter around the table died, the air thickened, and my world collapsed. Imagine standing there with a plate of food cooling in your hands while your own blood declares you no longer theirs. Imagine the silence of relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had seen you grow up staring at you as if you were a stranger. My heart hammered so hard I could not feel my legs. My throat closed like I had swallowed glass. I wanted to scream to demand why, but nothing came out. All I could hear was the echo of betrayal bouncing off the walls decorated with garlands and twinkling lights. I remember staring at the ornaments on the tree. They were the same ones I had hung as a child, little glass globes with glitter that caught the firelight. They looked so innocent, so festive, while inside me everything was breaking. My father looked at me not with anger, but with dismissal, like I was no more relevant than the empty chair at the corner of the room. My mother's lips were tight, her eyes daring me to fight back. Sophie's grin widened her shoulders, relaxing, as if a burden had been lifted from her. It was not only a betrayal, it was a performance staged in front of witnesses, so there would be no going back. In that moment, I understood something that I had tried to deny for years, that I had been holding up a family that never wanted me, that every sacrifice I had made was invisible in their eyes. The betrayal was not just spoken, it was written across the faces of the people I had once called home. And so I ask you, what would you do if on Christmas Eve, in front of every person you grew up with, your own parents declared you no longer their child? Would you bow your head and swallow the pain, or would you find the strength to answer back? Stay with me, because what I did next would not only silence the room, but expose everything they had tried to hide, and the consequences would echo far beyond that night. I grew up in a small suburban neighborhood in Lansing, Michigan, where every house seemed to glow a little brighter during December. Our own house looked cheerful from the street, with pale blue siding and colorful lights draped across the roofline, but inside it carried a tension that never matched the decorations. My father Robert worked at the auto plant for years, wearing his dark blue uniform like a badge of honor, but he carried his temper home with him, and whenever he was tired or had too much to drink, his voice filled the rooms like thunder. My mother Linda spent her days as a receptionist at a dentist's office, her energy always drained, yet she still found room to control every detail of our lives. She had a sharp tongue that could cut deeper than any slap, and her loyalty was clear. It was reserved for my younger sister Sophie. Sophie was born 6 years after me, and from the very beginning she was the golden child. If she scraped by in school with average grades, she was rewarded as though she had conquered the world. When she was 10 and had just barely passed her math class, she came home to a sparkling new pink bicycle, complete with a basket and streamers on the handlebars. That Christmas morning, she squealed with delight. My father crouched beside her, adjusting the training wheels, my mother clapping with pride. I stood in the corner clutching my report card, filled with straight A's, waiting for acknowledgement, hoping for a smile, or maybe a small gift that showed I mattered. Instead, my father glanced up, patted me once on the shoulder, and muttered, "Keep it up, kiddo," before turning back to Sophie. The message sank into me like a stone. My best would never be enough. It was not a single moment, but a pattern that repeated itself year after year. Sophie was given the bigger bedroom, even though she was younger. She was dressed in new clothes, while mine were hand-me-downs from cousins or clearance racks. At school events, my father's booming cheer always rose for her name, even if it was just for a participation ribbon, while his applause for my academic awards was polite and empty. I remember one particular afternoon when I was 10, Sophie burst through the door, waving a worksheet with a 60% scrawled across the top. My mother kissed her forehead and said she had done her best, then announced we should celebrate with ice cream. That same week, I had won the regional spelling bee, bringing home a ribbon I had worked so hard for, but no one asked, and I tucked it into my backpack where it remained unseen. That night, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, wondering why my effort always turned invisible. As Sophie grew older, she leaned into her role, acting as though applause was her birthright. She interrupted me at the dinner table, and if I dared object, my father scolded me for being unkind. My mother insisted Sophie was sensitive and needed extra encouragement, while I was told I was strong enough to manage without it. Over time, I became the quiet achiever, the dependable daughter who never made waves. Sophie basked in constant praise while I sank into silence. What stung most was not just the favoritism, but the moments of cruelty. One evening when I was 12, my father struck me across the face for talking back. The sting burned, but what stayed with me was my mother's reaction. She did not rush to defend me. She folded her arms and said in a calm voice, "You deserved it for making him angry." That sentence etched itself into me deeper than the red mark on my cheek. It taught me that my pain would always be minimized and my sister's comfort would always come first. These early experiences shaped the bitterness I carried into adulthood. Every Christmas, every birthday, every small family gathering became another stage where Sophie shined, and I stood in the shadows. I told myself that one day, if I worked hard enough, they would see me. I imagined that graduating with honors would force them to acknowledge me, or that Sophie's inevitable failures would expose the weight I had carried for so long. But recognition never came. What came instead was a deep wound of invisibility, a quiet understanding that in my family's eyes I was useful only when silent, valuable only when I carried more than my share, and always less loved than the sister whose laughter could bend rules and command attention. This was the foundation of my childhood, the backdrop against which every later betrayal would unfold, and it was the reason why, when my parents finally disowned me at 20, the words cut through me like a blade that had been sharpened for years. By the time I reached my teenage years, the imbalance in our family was already cemented, but the real weight began when my father lost his job at the auto plant. The day he came home with empty eyes and silent steps, the house felt smaller, airless. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter and arguments seeped through the thin walls at night. I was only 15, but I felt the ground shift beneath me. To help, I picked up shifts at a local cafe after school, wiping tables and pouring endless cups of coffee for customers who barely glanced my way. My paycheck was small, but I handed most of it to my mother, convinced that if I helped enough, they would finally see my worth. Meanwhile, Sophie kept cheerleading shopping trips and new gadgets without pause. The unfairness simmered, but I swallowed it, telling myself this was what good daughters did. At 16, I was working nearly 30 hours a week on top of classes, my grades still strong, though my body was drained. On weekends, when my friends went to the movies, I stayed late at the cafe or babysat neighbors' kids. I used to dream of saving for college or maybe a small car, but those dreams evaporated with each envelope of overdue notices I saw on the counter. When I turned 18, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table with serious expressions. My father said building credit early was important for my future. My mother nodded, saying it would help me later when I wanted to buy a car or apartment. They convinced me to open a credit card under my name, promising it would be a small step toward independence. I believed them. Within months, the card was maxed out, not by me, but by them groceries repairs, even Sophie's new clothes. They always said they would pay it back soon, but the payments never came. Instead, they urged me to open another account and then another. Soon, utilities, the car insurance, even the mortgage were tied to my accounts. They explained it like it was temporary, that my name was stronger for approvals. I told myself I was helping, that this was family duty. But deep down, a quiet panic grew. I was just a teenager, but the weight of an entire household rested on my shoulders. Each paycheck from my part-time jobs vanished before I could even hold it. When my friends celebrated their first college scholarships or internships, I was standing in line at the bank, depositing money straight into bills I never created. Sophie, meanwhile, failed at her first attempt at culinary school, then at a coffee cart idea. Each time she quit, my parents wrapped her in comfort, saying she was brave for trying. Each time I kept working, they told me I was reliable, the strong one, the one who could handle it. That word reliable became both a compliment and a chain. It excused every burden they placed on me. By 19, I was working 2 jobs while taking community college classes, barely sleeping. My father barked at me for not smiling more at dinner. My mother reminded me Sophie needed encouragement, not criticism. And always there were more bills, more demands. The more I gave, the less visible I became. I thought adulthood would mean freedom, but instead it meant deeper entanglement. Looking back, I see it clearly. I was not building credit, I was being used. Every loan, every card, every payment ran through me, while my parents and Sophie enjoyed the appearance of stability. And the cruelest part was how normal they acted, as if this was expected, as if it was natural for the eldest daughter to bleed herself dry. At 20, standing in that dining room on Christmas Eve, when my father declared I was no longer part of the family, all those years of sacrifice flashed before me. The cafe, shifts, the credit card statements, the exhausted mornings, the endless giving. I realized I had not been a daughter to them for years. I had been their financial lifeline, their walking wallet, and they had carved that role into my identity before I was old enough to see it. If there was one person who kept me from losing myself completely, it was Lauren Miller. We had met in high school, 2 awkward girls who bonded over late-night study sessions and cheap pizza, and by the time we were in our 20s, she had become my anchor. Lauren studied English at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, a quiet life with books and part-time tutoring, and she often invited me to visit when my schedule allowed. Sitting in her small apartment with its second-hand furniture and walls lined with novels felt like entering another world, one where I was not just the responsible daughter but simply myself. She saw things I refused to admit. One night, as we sipped instant coffee at her kitchen table, she leaned forward and said in her calm, steady way, "Anna, you know you are not their provider, right? You are not an ATM for them." Or her words hit like a slap of cold water. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "They are my parents," I said. "What am I supposed to do? Let them lose the house?" Lauren's eyes sharpened. "That house is on your account, isn't it? You told me your name is on the mortgage and bills. That is not helping, that is exploitation." I wanted to argue, but the word stuck in my throat. Exploitation. It sounded too harsh, too ugly, but it also rang with truth. I tried to brush it off. "I am the eldest," I said. "I am supposed to take care of things. Sophie needs more support. She is delicate." Lauren leaned back, her gaze steady. "That is exactly the story they want you to believe. You keep giving because you think it makes you a good daughter, but it is only draining you." My chest tightened, my hands twisting in my lap. I wanted to defend my parents, but memories of those credit cards, those bills that never went away, whispered louder. Lauren reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You deserve a life of your own, Anna, not one chained to their mistakes." The conviction in her voice made my stomach churn. I wished I could believe her, but guilt weighed heavier. Every time I thought of stepping back, I imagined my parents losing everything. Still, the seed was planted. On another visit a few months later, Lauren caught sight of a jar on my shelf labeled Emergency Fund. She shook it gently, hearing the clink of coins and a few folded bills. Then she looked at me with a half-smile that held no humor. "This is not your emergency fund, Anna. This is your guilt jar. Every time you put money in here, you are not saving for yourself, you are preparing to bail them out again." I protested weakly, but the words sank in. That night, lying on her couch, I stared at the ceiling while her words replayed in my mind. Guilt jar. Exploitation. ATM. They swirled together with the echo of my father's dismissive tone, my mother's cold eyes, Sophie's constant applause. I still defended them aloud, but inside, doubt had begun to grow roots. Lauren represented the voice of reason I had ignored for too long. She was the reminder that not every family functioned with cruelty. that not every daughter was reduced to a bank account, but believing her meant admitting my parents had used me and admitting that truth was terrifying. So I wavered, trapped between loyalty and awakening, between love that demanded sacrifice and friendship that offered clarity. It was this inner conflict that followed me into the holiday season, a storm building silently as Christmas approached. As December rolled in with its icy winds and glowing lights strung across every house in the neighborhood, I felt both dread and hope rising inside me. My parents had called me one evening, their voices carrying the same tone I had grown up with casual commands dressed up as requests. "Anna, why don't you host Christmas Eve this year?" my mother said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Your apartment has such a nice layout, it will be perfect." My father added, "It is time you contribute something real." The irony stung because for years I had carried the weight of their bills, but I swallowed the words and agreed. I wanted desperately to believe that if I made Christmas beautiful enough, they would finally see me. So I threw myself into preparation with a determination that bordered on obsession. Every dollar from my part-time job at the bookstore and the evening shifts at the cafe went into groceries and decorations. I bought a large turkey fresh vegetables, pies, bottles of good wine. I chose candles scented with pine and cinnamon, imagining how the glow and fragrance would fill the room with warmth. I wandered through aisles of ornaments until I found silver and red sets that shimmered under the store lights. My cart was so heavy I struggled to push it, but I kept telling myself it would be worth it. At night, after work, I stayed up hanging garlands, stringing fairy lights around my small apartment, carefully setting the table with cloth napkins and sprigs of holly. I wrapped gifts for each family member, even Sophie, though bitterness burned in my chest. I told myself that generosity might melt the wall between us. Every action was charged with hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year they would look around and say, "Thank you, Anna, we are proud of you." My best friend Lauren came with me on one of those shopping trips. As we loaded bags into the trunk, she shook her head. "You do realize none of them will appreciate this, right?" I forced a smile, clutching the receipt that had drained nearly half my month's wages. "Maybe this year will be different," I whispered. "It is Christmas after all." She looked at me with sympathy but did not argue. She knew I needed to believe it. As the day drew closer, I imagined the scene in detail. My parents stepping into my apartment and being surprised at how elegant everything looked. Sophie smiling, maybe even thanking me for once. Laughter around the table clinking glasses, a prayer that included my name. That fragile hope carried me through the exhaustion of preparing. On the morning of Christmas Eve, I stood back and looked at the apartment. The tree sparkled with lights, the table was perfectly set, the counters were filled with trays ready for roasting. My small space had been transformed into something magical. I pressed my hand against my chest, letting the pride sink in. Maybe this time they would see me not as the invisible daughter or the walking wallet, but as someone who deserved a place at the table. That thought warmed me even as snow piled outside and the cold pressed against the windows. It was the last moment of peace before everything unraveled. The snow fell in thick flakes as twilight settled on Christmas Eve, and by the time my parents arrived, my small apartment glowed with candles and twinkling lights. I opened the door with a hopeful smile, only to be met with my father's critical gaze. He stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat, and his eyes landed on my used but reliable sedan parked outside. "Fancy for a 20-year-old," he muttered. "You should be saving instead of wasting money." My chest tightened, but I forced a polite smile. "It is safe for the commute, Dad, that is all." He shrugged as if unconvinced and walked past me without another word. My mother followed her eyes, sweeping over the decorations I had spent weeks arranging. She gave a thin smile that carried no warmth. "A little flashy," she said, "not really our style." I swallowed the sting and helped them with their coats. Soon, relatives trickled in Aunt Barbara and Uncle George cousins with gifts in hand. Their faces lit with genuine warmth, and for a moment I felt the glow of belonging. I guided them to the table, offering wine, soaking in the compliments about how festive the place looked. For once, my efforts were acknowledged, and it sent a flutter of pride through me. But that pride dimmed when Sophie finally arrived nearly an hour late. The door swung open, and in she walked, hair perfectly styled, coat draped over her shoulders like she was entering a stage. Sorry I am late, she announced. Had to stop by a friend's to talk about my new fitness app idea. Immediately, my father's face brightened. My mother rushed forward with open arms. The room shifted as though the main character had arrived. I stood by the kitchen counter wiping my hands on a towel, watching as they hung on Sophie's every word. She leaned back in her chair, her voice carrying across the table as she explained her vision. It is going to revolutionize home workouts, she said, eyes shining. I just need about $40,000 to build the prototype and launch the marketing. My father nodded proudly. My mother clasped her hands with delight. Our daughter, the entrepreneur, my father declared, chest swelling with pride. I felt the burn rise in my chest. Finally, I asked, voice steady, what makes your app different from the hundreds already on the market? Do you have developers lined up? Have you considered the failure rate in that industry? Sophie's smile faltered for a second, then she waved her hand dismissively. You would not understand, Anna. I pressed, investors will want more than ideas, they will need numbers, strategy proof. Before I could finish, my father cut me off sharply. Do not ruin Christmas with your negativity. Let your sister dream. The room went quiet, eyes shifting between us. Sophie smirked, leaning back as if victorious. You know what your problem is, Anna, she said sweetly. You live such a boring little life. Safe jobs, safe choices. You are too afraid to take risks, and that is why you will never do anything extraordinary. Her words sliced deeper than she knew because they echoed what my parents had implied all my life. I stared at her memories flooding of all the times I had worked double shifts to keep this very family afloat while she burned through money chasing dreams. My pulse pounded in my ears. I thought of the credit cards in my name, the bills tied to my accounts, the years of exhaustion. The laugh that escaped me was bitter. How many times have you borrowed money and never paid it back, Sophie? The food truck idea, the boutique, the crypto scheme, all disasters, all funded by Mom and Dad, and when that was not enough, by me. Gasps rippled around the table, relatives exchanging shocked glances. Sophie's face flushed red. That is different, she snapped. At least I try. You just hide behind your paycheck. Enough, my father roared, slamming his fist on the table so hard the plates rattled. Do not drag your sister down. The sound echoed, silencing the room. My mother leaned closer. Her voice, sharp but quiet, meant only for me. You have always been jealous of Sophie. Always. The knife twisted deeper. Jealous. That was what they thought after all the sleepless nights, the missed opportunities, the thousands drained from my accounts. Something inside me cracked. Slowly, I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. My voice was calm but steady. Fine. If I am not family, then from now on, you pay every single bill yourselves. Every mortgage payment, every utility, every car, every phone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Aunt Barbara's eyes widened. Uncle George leaned back in disbelief. Sophie looked around desperately, searching for defense. My father glared at me, but for the first time, his anger did not scare me. I laid my napkin gently on the table, my hands no longer trembling. I am done pretending I said done carrying this weight while being treated like I do not exist. Then I stood and walked toward the hallway, each step lighter than the last, leaving behind a table full of shocked faces and a truth that could no longer be hidden. The hallway was quiet, except for the thud of my heartbeat, but behind me, voices rose sharp and frantic. I turned slowly, not ready to leave just yet. My legs carried me back to the dining room doorway, and I stood tall, though my hands trembled at my sides. Everyone stared frozen in a tableau of shock. My father's jaw clenched, his knuckles white around the stem of his glass. Sophie's cheeks burned crimson, her eyes darting from one relative to another as if searching for an escape. My mother pressed her lips together, her gaze filled with cold fire. I inhaled deeply, steadying my voice. For the past 5 years, I said clearly, I have been the one paying for this family to survive. $800 every month for the mortgage, $400 for utilities, $600 for the car, insurance, phones, internet streaming, all of it in my name. Added up year after year, and it comes to nearly $150,000. The numbers fell into the room like stones, dropped into water, each one sending ripples of disbelief. Gasps spread down the table. Aunt Barbara's fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto her plate. Uncle George leaned back, eyebrows raised, muttering under his breath. Even my younger cousins looked up from their plates, eyes wide. My father barked a laugh, hard and bitter. "Money does not make you family, Anna. Loyalty does, and you clearly have none." My chest tightened, but I held his gaze. "Loyalty," I repeated, tasting the word. "You call draining your own child's accounts loyalty. You call pushing me into debt loyalty." My mother leaned forward, her tone low and sharp. "Do not twist this. You helped because you wanted to. You are strong, you can handle it. Sophie is delicate. She needs encouragement." My laugh burst out before I could stop it, jagged and raw. Encouragement. Is that what you call giving her thousands for failed businesses while I scrape together tips to keep your lights on? Is that what you call praising her for C grades while ignoring my straight A's? Sophie shoved her chair back, her voice rising. "You are just bitter, Anna. You are jealous that people actually believe in me, that I am brave enough to chase dreams while you hide behind safe little jobs." My hands curled into fists at my sides, but my voice stayed calm. "Brave. You call quitting one scheme after another brave. You call using other people's money brave. The only brave thing you have ever done is admit failure, and you have not even done that." The silence that followed was electric. Sophie's mouth opened and closed, no words forming. My father slammed his palm on the table again, rattling the silverware. "Enough," he thundered. "You will not shame your sister in this house." I took a step forward, my eyes locking with his. "Then hear me clearly," I said, my voice steady though my chest pounded. "If I am not your daughter, if I am not family as you just declared, then from this night on, you are on your own. Every payment ends. Every account closes. Every bill in my name returns to you." Gasps echoed again, Aunt Barbara's hand flying to her mouth. Uncle George shook his head slowly, murmuring unbelievable. My mother's face drained of color, her hands tightening around her napkin. Sophie's smirk faltered into panic. I could see the cracks spreading across the perfect image they had tried to project. The relatives who once looked at me with polite indifference now stared with something else, recognition, maybe even sympathy. My father opened his mouth, fury blazing, but I did not let him speak. I turned toward the door, my final words slicing through the air like glass. "You wanted me gone. Now you will see what life looks like without me holding it together." And then I walked away, each step fueled by the years of silence, sacrifice, and pain that had led to this night. When I reached my bedroom, the quiet pressed against me like a heavy blanket, but underneath the pounding of my heart, there was a strange clarity. I closed the door, leaned against it for a moment, and let the chaos of the dining room fade into muffled voices. My laptop sat on the desk by the window screen, dark, waiting. I pulled the chair out, sat down, and opened it with hands that no longer shook. The glow of the screen lit the room as snow continued to fall outside. I went straight to the mortgage account, the same one my parents had convinced me to tie to my name when I was 18. The auto payment was scheduled for the 1st of January. My finger hovered doubt whispering, but then I thought of my father's voice declaring I was not family. I pressed cancel. A confirmation box popped up asking if I was sure. "Yes," I whispered aloud, clicking through. The weight in my chest loosened just a little. Next came the utilities, electricity, water, gas. Each one linked to my debit card. Each one draining me, month after month. Cancel, cancel, cancel. With every click, the chains tightened around me for years began to fall away. I moved on to the phone plan, the one my parents insisted remain under my name, so Sophie could upgrade her devices. I removed every line except mine and changed the account details. Then the insurance, the streaming services, the internet. My fingers flew over the keyboard with a precision born from years of resentment. Each step felt like carving my name back out of their grasp. At last, I drafted a single email addressed to both my parents. From now on, I wrote, "These are your responsibilities, not mine." The sentence looked stark on the screen, but it carried the weight of everything I had endured. I hit send and sat back, breathing hard. For the first time in years, the accounts were no longer mine to carry. For the first time, the responsibility lay where it belonged. I closed the laptop and looked around the room. The decorations I had hung for them now glowed only for me. Silver lights twinkling above a tree that suddenly felt like my own. My reflection in the dark window showed tired eyes, but also something else, a flicker of freedom. I whispered again, almost in disbelief, "I am free." The words trembled, but they were true. In that small apartment on Christmas Eve, while laughter and outrage spilled from the dining room down the hall, I had taken back my life one click at a time. The next morning, the world outside my window was blanketed in snow, bright and untouched, but my phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails stacked one after another, text messages screaming in capital letters. My father's voice came first, cold and thunderous through the speaker. "Whatever game you are playing ends today. Restore the accounts or I will contact a lawyer." He spat the words elder abuse as if throwing stones. My stomach tightened, but I pressed play on the next message. My mother's voice trembled, though I recognized the performance. "Your father had chest pains this morning. He is at the hospital now. The stress of what you did pushed him over the edge. If anything happens, it will be on you." For a moment, guilt clawed at me, but then another message followed this one from Aunt Barbara. "Do not believe what they are saying," she said firmly. "Robert was outside shoveling snow this morning." Dr. Harris, the neighbor, saw him and waved. He looked perfectly fine. My breath escaped in a shaky laugh. Their lie had unraveled before it even reached me. Another voicemail rolled in Sophie's shrill voice, piercing. "You ruined Christmas, Anna. Do you even realize what you have done? I had an important meeting and now I cannot even leave the house because the car is gone. You are pathetic." My hand tightened around the phone, but I did not reply. Then came the sharp knock at my door. 2 police officers stood in the hallway, snow dusting their uniforms. "Your father reported possible financial tampering," one explained. I invited them in calmly, showed them the accounts, the paperwork, all in my name, the history of payments. They exchanged looks and nodded. "This is a civil matter," one said. "We will note the report, but there is nothing criminal here." When they left, relief washed over me, but the sting of humiliation for my parents must have been unbearable. Neighbors had gathered outside their house watching flashing lights and uniforms. Whispers would spread quickly through the street that Robert and Linda had involved police only to be dismissed. Aunt Barbara called again that afternoon, her voice softer. "We know the truth, Anna. We watched you bring groceries. We watched you hand them money year after year. It is time people see what you have carried. Uncle George came on the line too. Frankly, he said we are shocked it took this long." By evening, the story had traveled across the family tree. My mother's older sister Diane called in tears, admitting she had seen the favoritism for years, but stayed silent. "I should have spoken up," she said. "You were the one keeping them afloat while Sophie wasted everything." Her confession cracked something open in me, a mix of sorrow and vindication. Meanwhile, the fallout began at my parents' house. Without my payments, the utilities were cut within days. The car loan notices arrived, demanding attention. My father, stripped of pride, took a night job as a security guard. My mother picked up extra shifts at the dental office, her smile at work hiding exhaustion. Sophie, no longer cushioned, was forced to take a job folding leggings and selling sneakers at a sporting goods store. The golden child reduced to minimum wage. And through it all, the whispers of neighbors grew louder. Dr. Harris mentioned at church that Robert had lied about his health. Aunt Barbara shared with cousins that Linda had stood by while I carried everything. The perfect image my parents had polished for years cracked wide open. I felt pangs of guilt some nights lying awake with my phone buzzing beside me, but alongside that guilt was relief. The truth was finally visible. The shame that had been mine alone now sat heavy on their shoulders, witnessed by everyone around them. For once, I was no longer invisible. The world knew, and they had to live with it. When the dust of that holiday finally settled, I found myself walking through the streets of Detroit with the sharp winter wind cutting my cheeks and a strange lightness in my chest. I went to see Lauren first, carrying the weight of everything that had unfolded. The moment she opened the door, I broke, collapsing into her arms, tears soaking her sweater as she whispered, "It is over, Anna, you did it." We sat for hours on her couch, mugs of tea, cooling untouched, while I told her about the police, the lies, the calls, the way the relatives had finally spoken up. She listened without interruption, her steady presence reminding me that not all family ties are chains. In the weeks that followed, I took steps I had always been too afraid to imagine. I found a therapist downtown who specialized in family trauma, and every Tuesday evening I sat in a softly lit office pouring out the parts of me I had hidden for years. The guilt, the resentment, the hunger for validation, all of it spilled out, and little by little the heaviness lifted. I joined a support group where strangers told stories that sounded too much like mine, and together we laughed and cried and encouraged each other to build lives beyond the pain. At the same time, my career began to shift. Freed from the drain of constant bills, I accepted an internship with a tech company in Detroit, throwing myself into projects with energy I never knew I had. For once, my paycheck was mine. My evenings were not consumed with anxiety over due dates, but with plans for my own future. I began to save a real savings account in my own name, untouched by anyone else. I bought books, new clothes, small things that felt like luxuries because they were chosen for me. Meanwhile, the updates from Lansing trickled in through relatives. My parents had sold the old house and moved into a smaller rental. My father grumbled about long nights as a guard, my mother's health wavered under extra hours, and Sophie drifted between jobs, her dreams dimming in the fluorescent light of retail. I did not rejoice, but I did not intervene either. Their lives had become their own to manage, just as mine had finally become mine to build. Months later, on a spring afternoon, Lauren and I sat at a cafe by the river. The sun glinted off the water, children laughed nearby, and for the first time in years, I felt a calm sense of belonging. She asked if I regretted it if cutting ties on Christmas Eve still haunted me. I looked at her and realized the answer had shifted. I did not regret standing up for myself. I only regretted waiting so long to do it. I had been invisible in that house for 2 decades, a shadow holding everything together. But now, as I watched the world moving forward, I felt free. And so, if you are listening to my story, if you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever been drained dry by those who were supposed to love, you know this: you are not alone. Real family is not defined by blood or obligation. Real family is the people who treat you like you matter. I learned that lesson the hardest way possible on a night that should have been filled with joy, but turned into betrayal. Yet, from that night came freedom healing and the chance to build a life on my own terms. So I ask you, have you ever had to step away from toxic family ties? Have you ever found the strength to draw a line and claim your future? Share your story in the comments. And if mine has touched you, give it a like and subscribe for more, because sometimes the bravest act is not holding on, but letting go.